Welcome everyone to another edition of Play It Through, and on this edition is Rockman and Forte for the Wonderswan, brought to us by Capcom and Bandai. If the game were to be translated into English, the real name would be Rockman and Forte Megaman and Bass, Challenger from the Future. This is actually one of the last games released in the original Mega Man series, up until Capcom revived it with Mega Man 9 in 2008. The game is actually more of a sequel or side game to Rockman and Forte or Mega Man and Bass that was released for the Super Famicom a few years earlier. In the game, you play as either Mega Man or Bass or Rockman or Forte, depending upon which version you would like to call him. In this, of course, video, we'll be referring to him as Mega Man, and that's who I'll be playing as during the course of this run. At the beginning of the game, I show the options screen, and one of the reasons why is to show the controls for the game. You can play it one of two different ways. The Wonderswan was a very interesting console. It actually featured two D-pads, the X-pad and the Y-pad, as well as your A and B buttons. And you can actually play the game fully by either holding it horizontally or vertically. Now I'll be playing with the kind of default normal scheme that you would hold kind of like your Game Boy Advance or a normal system, but there is one level, actually the third level that we'll be doing in the game, that you actually have to hold it the other way. Why it's done like that, I'm not exactly positive, since the level plays pretty similarly to all the other levels in the game. One of the things that's so great about this game is its overall storyline that connects it to not only the original Mega Man series, but also to the Mega Man Game Boy games. Our main villain for the game is actually not Dr. Wiley at all. Instead, it's actually Rockman's Shadow. He'll be later revealed of his true nature as we get later on into the game, but for right now, it's still interesting to see that it actually isn't Dr. Wiley, and trust me, Dr. Wiley doesn't make any appearances in the game. Another really cool thing about the game is the Robot Masters themselves. They're all original, not appearing in any of the other Mega Man games. And interestingly enough, they're never really seen again except for a very brief cameo in Mega Man ZX of all games, appearing as actually comic book characters. Okay, now for the actual gameplay. Mega Man actually controls quite well, so does Forte if you decide to play as him. You can slide as well as charge up your moves as Mega Man. The jumping works extremely well. Playing this actually on the Wonderswan is actually a lot of fun and one of my favorite games I own on the Wonderswan. There are a few interesting things though. You can fire out a few shots at one time, and when you charge up your blast, unless it's up to its full charge, you can't use it. If you halfway charge up your Mega Buster and let it go, nothing comes out. That's one of those things you have to get used to in the game, because in most Mega Man games when you charge up, even if it's only a little bit of a charge, it'll still do a little bit of a blast. Also, every one of the levels in the game features a mini-stage boss as well as a final boss. Now here is the boss for the introduction stage, the Grey Devil. Now the Grey Devil is very similar to one that we've seen in a few other Mega Man games, except instead of having to hit him multiple times in order to expose the eye inside of his chest area, you can just actually keep blasting him every time the eye gets forward. You can do damage. One thing that's really cool about the game you'll notice is the enemies have no invulnerability time, so you can just keep laying in hits. Very few Mega Man games actually do this, and one of the only ones I can really remember was the Mega Man DOS games, but trust me, this plays a heck of a lot better than that. Also, with the extra moves that you're going to be getting in the game, when you use them, they all have a set number of damage they do to bosses. It's not like the bosses really have a true weakness. Now, certain moves will definitely help you out more so than other moves, but, interestingly enough, they will all do the same amount of damage. Here, we're actually shown Rockman's Shadow, or the main villain of the game for the first time. After completing the introduction level, you can save your game or just go right on to the actual Robot Master selection screen, and here we can select from one of 4 Robot Masters to deal with next. I also like when you defeat one of these guys and come back to this menu, there's actually a defeated picture for each of the masters. The first one that we're going to be going with is Rockman Man. Now he's actually the one who appears on the cover of the comic book in Megaman ZX. He's also our fire-based Robot Master for the game. I have to say, while the game may not be the best of the handheld Mega Man games, this game definitely stands out. It has some good sound, which the Wonderswan definitely featured, and the controls are pretty good. You'll see a lot, though, of the same enemies throughout the game as we travel through it, as well as a few of the same types of areas. For example, sliding under a set of spikes in a row is a common theme in the game. Spikes in the game will kill you instantly like they do in most Mega Man games, so you'll have to be careful. But thankfully you do get a bit of invulnerability, so that if you do land on the spikes, you can quickly jump off of them if you ended up getting hit by an enemy prior to hitting the spikes. These guys with the spike balls are one of the more annoying guys. You're going to see them a ton. You can't shoot them when they have the mace ball completely out in front of them, so you'll have to hit the attack button once they draw it back and they're swinging it over their head. In this area, we deal with the first of the stage mini-bosses for the Robot Masters. This giant hand will pop out of the ground and try to grab pieces of the ground itself. Of course, if you jump into any of the exposed areas, you'll hit the spikes and die, but just keep firing at him, and after he comes out about 4 or maybe at most 5 times, you should be able to get enough hits on him in order to defeat him, and once you do so, the door will open up on the right side. This is something you'll see throughout the entire game, as well as the path thankfully reforms. Now, it's a little bit difficult to see if you're playing on the handheld system itself, but there are mines laying around the ground. You'll see them activated with a little black square will start to form, and once a full 4-square black square appears, the bomb will actually flash and explode. So be careful of walking on the ground throughout the game. For example, here's one of those right now. You can see it go off there, and if you look closely at it, you can actually spot it, but it's a little bit difficult. These firefighter guys are one of my least favorite enemies, but thankfully there's not a lot of these guys in the game. You have to actually jump and hit them in the head while they're doing their giant flame out in front of them. Trying to fire directly at the flame itself will not allow you to hit them, it'll just deflect your shot. And overall, they do a decent amount of damage when they walk into the flame, so you want to try to avoid that, especially later in the level if you don't have a whole lot of health as we get closer to the actual boss fight. You're also going to see a lot of Matools, so get used to the timing with the Matools in the game, because there's a ton of them. Here we go with the first Robot Master fight. Like I said before, you can keep attacking them over and over again when they're vulnerable. For example, this guy you can only attack when he tries to duck down and fire straight out at you. He then goes up into the air, does a big blast that spreads across the entire ground, and then he goes to the opposite side, firing fire up into the air, and as it crashes back down, he'll actually turn his face towards you, and you can keep mashing the attack button to do a lot of damage. It usually takes me about 3 or 4 cycles of this in order to do enough damage to take him out. Try to do your best to jump over and avoid as many of the flames as you can, because they do deal a good amount of damage, but the game is actually pretty lenient at times as far as your overall health goes. Once you defeat him, you get his special move, and we move on to the next Robot Master. Now the next Robot Master that I'm going to be dealing with is Aircon Man, and now this is the guy that we actually have to flip our system over and play it the opposite way, but don't worry, I'm going to modify it so you'll be able to see the game correctly. And because of the way I have to angle my video, I do apologize for the way it's set up right now, but thankfully this is, like I said, the only level that you have to do like this in the game. Be careful of the crab enemy at the top of the one ladder there. The crab guys will throw out a bubble from time to time, and they'll trap you inside the bubble, taking you over a nearby ledge, so you'll have to be careful to avoid that. When falling through here, you'll have to dodge in and out of a whole lot of spikes. This can be really a pain as the hit detection's a little bit off at times, and you may accidentally clip one of the spikes lining all the areas. Thankfully, the area is not too long, and after that we have not only hammerhead sharks pounding at the ground, but we also have some more of the crab guys. These sharks are a real nuisance, that's for sure. There's also a shop in the game. You collect bolts in order to buy different items, and while I won't really explore that because I don't collect a whole lot of bolts in the game, the shop's actually cool. It actually contains just about all of the different animal buddies that you get throughout the game, including Beat, Rush, and even Tango the cat, who was only seen in Mega Man 5 for Game Boy. For this side boss, we're going to be using the flame weapon that we got from the previous boss, using it in order to send flames up into the air to hit the giant octopus in the air. If you time this right, you can actually jump over the Matools firing consistently at you and keep hitting the squid. With this fight though, if you end up killing one of the Matools on the left or right side, he just spawns another one. It's just an endless cycle of the Matools, so take out the guy with the flame jumps and you should be able to get past him. Definitely one of the tougher bosses. If you don't for some reason have a flame item, if you did this guy first, attacking the Matools will actually bounce off of them when they're actually not looking at you, and the fire projectiles that ricochet will go up and actually hit the enemy. And you can actually do this with any projectile in the game. If you fire at an enemy and it bounces off of them and flies off screen, anytime until it goes completely off, it runs into an enemy, it will actually still do damage, which is something interesting that we didn't see in other Mega Man games. Thankfully at this point we've lost a little bit of health and there's a nice big chunk of health right in our way. The hardest part about this level are these things right here. These balloon-like enemies that you have to fire at in order to inflate, then jump on them and then control them by hitting left or right in order to maneuver them around all the spikes. Here I like to take out the bat enemy first before attempting to get on the balloon itself. Like I said, this is definitely a little bit of a challenge. Sometimes getting through this area though, in case your balloon ends up breaking, try to land on solid ground before, of course, going off screen and then coming back on in order to get the enemy to respawn. In all honesty, this is probably one of the toughest areas in the entire game, not just this level. Also, using the brief bit of invincibility that you get from running into enemies can help you a bit, because if you stand too close to the far edges of the octopus, you can sometimes run into it before you end up trying to jump through a small area of spikes, using that brief invulnerability to bypass some of the instant deaths you may occur. Thankfully, we're done with those rooms. I bring out the flame ability to take out another shark before going over to the left and climbing up the ladders here. Unfortunately, this Matool can fire at you immediately when you go on screen, so what you have to do is actually jump in the air to get over the Matool in order to actually make it to the next screen without him constantly knocking you back. Once you enter here into the boss chamber, the game asks you, well, to flip everything back over and play like you have been in the first few levels of the game. Like I said, only time you have to do that, it's interesting and cool, and it uses the Wonderswan's mechanics to do a relatively interesting level. For the boss itself, he uses a giant fan to try to blow you away, then going to the top, he actually summons rocks. These rocks can instantly kill you if you get caught in between two of them. So what you'll have to do is jump on the rocks themselves to jump up at him in order to do damage. Now you can use the fire move to help you out as well. That way you can actually fire straight up into the air with the fire in order to hit him while he's floating above you. One thing I should mention about the weapons in the game themselves is they don't regenerate between levels. We saw this a couple of times in Mega Man games, but once again, they do not regenerate, so if you run out of a certain fire item, you have to replenish it with item replenishments in the stages, or buy an item replenishment from the shop in order to fill that back up. Once you've done enough damage to the guy though, we grab his ability and we move on to the third Robot Master. Next up is Camus Sermon, and he's definitely my favorite robot master in the game, though he actually is one of the toughest to fight straight on. His level is an oriental forest type stage. You have some grasshoppers at the beginning that fire a few shots before jumping towards you, as well as you have a few bugs flying overhead that will fire projectiles. One thing the game has, though, is some tricky areas as far as being able to tell where you're supposed to go. Always try to go left or right off screen before attempting any of the pits nearby. I found myself accidentally trying the pits out sometimes and losing a life that way, so always try to go through the openings in the walls first. Giant frog guy down here you'll have to fire a lot of shots at and try to avoid his giant bubble that he spits out at you. Here we have the mini-boss for this level. This giant laser firing machine is an enemy that we actually see in a smaller form as a normal enemy throughout the game. Moves back and forth up and down and then keeps firing lasers, eventually switching over from the right side of the room to the left side. You can only hit him in the exposed panel in the center. Use your fully charged up shots when you can in order to do damage here and avoid the giant lasers. After you do enough damage though, he'll be defeated and we can continue on in the level. Be very careful here, because every time you land on a platform, it will fall just a few seconds later, so you don't have too much time to make it to the next platform. Be careful at any time in the game where you see that there's ceilings of spikes in a row. There's a lot of them, they're not too bad, but just going too fast through an area may cause you to accidentally just barely clip one, and of course doing so will cost you a life. Most of this area is just you battling those frogs, as well as the giant ladybug enemies, which, while they take up a lot of space, aren't really too tricky to deal with. These beetle enemies that you see a lot of times in the game, you have to wait for them to get ready to attack you before they leave themselves open for you to actually do some damage to them. There's also a good amount of them throughout the game that you can actually completely avoid if you time it right. Though some other ones like these, you have to take care of at least one before attempting to make it to these platforms without running the risk of accidentally getting hit by their projectiles on a platform that goes away. Now, like I said, this is definitely one of the toughest bosses in the game. He starts off by cloning himself 3 times and they fly to 3 corners of the room. They then fire a ton of projectiles down below you. He comes down and then he runs across the room, running into you, doing a lot of damage. You can only hit him though when he's standing in the center after coming back down, or after he does this 3 times, you'll finally have a good opportunity. I'm never able to really hit him at any other point, and I can't really jump over him at times. Thankfully though, after 3 of these, he then summons fire from the ground. This will do a lot of damage as well, but with some nice timing standing next to him, we can use the wave move that we just got from the previous Robot Master to do a lot of damage to him in order to defeat him and move on to the next level. The last of the robot masters that we have to deal with here is Dr Man. Now, he literally translates to Bullet Man, and that's exactly what he looks like, a giant bullet. His stage starts off with some conveyor belts moving up and down, so jump between those. You'll notice that shark enemy all throughout the game. As soon as you get ready to see him, or if you know he's coming, fire out a fully charged out shot so you can hit him before he starts charging you, or at least prepare to jump over him. It's also interesting to note they have different types of bat enemies. Your traditional cannonball style bat from the classic Megaman series, and then a bat that resembles closely to the bats from the Mega Man X series. Also interesting to note is that the enemies in general resemble a lot more closely to Mega Man X enemies than they do to the classic Mega Man enemies. For example, even this guy here reminds you of the kind of sub-boss in the intro stage to the original Mega Man X. This guy fires out multiple projectiles, and after you get hit by all of them, he'll switch to the opposite side of the room, in which case he'll fire out more projectiles. Keep hitting him repeatedly over and over again until you're able to do enough damage to get rid of him, and move on. These guys that end up spewing out rocks when they end up shooting will actually be used in a later level to actually get to a certain ladder, and you'll have to use them, but most of the time you can defeat them and you don't have to really worry about the rocks they're shooting out. Here I hug the right wall as I fall down to make sure that I get into this opening on the right side, so I don't accidentally fall into the pit down below. Notice at the top you're going to have a couple of beams that will fall down when you walk underneath of them, so you're going to have to be careful. Usually I like to get them to kind of start falling and then backtrack a second or so with some sliding in order to avoid taking any hits. You'll see a couple of these giant cog enemies as well. They just move back and forth. A couple of charged up shots, or a charged up shot and a bunch of regular little ones. These guys are no problem. They have a set pattern though. They don't go all the way to the left or right sides of the screen. They only go through a little bit of an area. So be careful when you're trying to attack them by chasing them down. Be careful of the giant cubes floating in the air and get ready for the next boss fight. Here we're going to be using the move we just got from the previous Robot Master to help us out greatly. To use it though, you have to charge it up for a second, and then you'll start charging towards the boss using the blade. Doing this with the boss on the left or right walls when he forms will do a good amount of damage to him. For his main attack, he summons a whole bunch of missiles that crash into the ground. He'll then turn into a giant bullet and run across the screen back and forth before reforming and jumping to the opposite side, repeating the process. When the missiles he fires out do hit the ground, it does shake the ground for a second, causing you to lose control of both your Mega Buster and moving in general. We now have 3 Robot Masters left to deal with. After getting past the first 4, we then go to the next level, which is Clockmen's level. We also get a brief cutscene with Proto-Men before going into this. The Clockmen is an interesting Robot Master because, for the first time, it's not just one Robot Master or a Robot Master that cloned himself. It actually counts as 2 separate masters. There's a lot of these enemies that are crawling along the ceilings, dropping down at you during this part, as well as a bunch of Matools getting in your way. Usually I find it best to just try to rush my way through a lot of these guys. There is a large piece of health. You can destroy the wall to your left if you want to grab that, or just of course continue on. These weird kite-like enemies that fly around, you'll have to shoot them only when they're actually facing you. So because of that, they can get annoying, especially in a room like this when you're trying to make it over the gap. Here, be sure to take out at least 2 of them and wait for the other one to pass you by before using the spring to get you over the large gap. When you enter into this room here, you'll have a giant spike wall coming down on top of you trying to squash you. Of course, any contact with the spikes is death. So what you'll have to do is take out the Matools, and then wait for the right opportunities with the ceiling raising upwards so you can go through. This is something you'll see in a lot of games. It's nothing really new to it, but just be careful throughout. Here we have a giant cannon that jumps from one side of the room to the other to start off, causing a whole bunch of stuff to fall down. Avoid this, and then he does slow jumps, just about 1 body length at a time across the room, dropping a projectile behind him, and he repeats this pattern over and over again. Definitely one of the easiest side bosses to deal with, and usually it takes maybe 1 or 2 cycles in order to get rid of this guy. The giant fat cannonball-like bats will fire out a lot of projectiles quickly. Thankfully there's a large piece of health up here along the path that we're going to be taking to get over to this room. And this room introduces the gravity gimmick to the level. You're going to see arrows pointing up or down on the ceiling and floor, and this will reverse your gravity while standing on them. You'll use this to your advantage so you can get over the large open areas. Of course, any pit during this time is a death, so be careful of that. In this room, take out the butterfly before attempting to use the spring to get over the gap. Do it again in the next room in order to get over the final gap of the level. Now it's time for the boss fight against Clockman. When you enter the fight, there's only one standing there, but the other one will quickly slide towards you, going all the way across the screen. Then, they'll both slide in towards you, going towards the center. Jump over them and equip your fire ability, and hit them in the air when they shoot out a whole bunch of projectiles from the sky. You can actually hit them twice with 2 sets of fire if you're really quick and time it right, but usually I at least get in 1. They'll then come to the other side of the screen, in which case they will then summon a clock, and when the clock actually connects with one another, it freezes you in place, causing lightning to strike everywhere. The lightning strikes do a lot of damage. You can't really avoid them since it freezes time, so there's a lot of luck here. Once that goes away though, get ready to jump over them as they slide towards the screen again, and then go back up into the air to repeat the process. For defeating them, you get the time switch ability. One of the most useless of the abilities in the game because it just, well, freezes time, and you can use this even against bosses. The problem with it is it doesn't do any damage to the bosses, and you can't use your Mega Buster while using it. Our next Robot Master, the 6th one that we're going to be dealing with, and the second to last one of the game, is Camus Man. After a cutscene with him at the beginning of the level, we then jump into the actual stage. Here you'll have a bunch of enemies, mainly grasshoppers throughout here that you'll destroy, making over a few small pits. Here, we'll drop down into the center to go down below, and I hug the right wall here, so I land on top of the beetle. I take a little bit of damage, but it allows me to land safely on the platform and continue on. Here you'll have a couple more of the beetles down below you, avoid them as they fire out their projectiles, and make it to the opening on the right side of the room. For this side boss, you start off by having him actually summon the giant thing above him, and they end up connecting for a few seconds. I don't know if this actually charges him up at all, it's just kind of weird. They connect, and then it sends the one flying across. The one above will either have a giant mace ball, or a giant cannon that pops out of it that will fire projectiles. The main robot itself just moves from side to side, from the left side of the screen to the right or opposite, and fires out 2 sets of projectiles coming out of each side of it before it reaches the next wall. The main thing you gotta avoid here is the giant machine above you, especially with the mace ball that will come flying at your direction depending upon how he's moving. The other big problem with that guy is you can only hit him, of course, in the head itself instead of his body, so that's a little bit of a pain. Drop down through here a few screens, be sure to hug the right wall so that you land safely, and move on. Here you'll have a series of rooms with more of those rolling bug guys. These guys I like to destroy, then climb up here, and as soon as I reach the next stairs, release another one to destroy the next one in line. This room, destroy the laser firing machine from the right side safely before attempting to go to the conveyor belt. And then next up, with the beetle, shoot him from as far left as you can so you don't actually hit the conveyor belt before going to his platform. This area can be a little bit tricky because there's a lot of laser firing machines, so just be very careful on the actual conveyor belts moving you back and forth. When you reach the end though, it's time to battle Camus Man. Camus Man is one of the more interesting bosses. He actually splits in half and you can actually only hit the top part of the legs of him. He flies across the screen on the top portion and does a few different things, either firing projectiles, spinning like a top, and actually flying towards you on the bottom of the screen, while his legs just keep moving back and forth left and right. These are a little bit troublesome to actually jump over because they take up so much space on the main ground. There's one of two things you can really do to help you out, either using the Mega Buster to hit him straight on, or by using the missile ability that we got from Dengan Man in order to help us out, and that does a lot of damage as well. Once you deliver the last hit though, he is defeated and we have one more level left to go. Now it's time to battle Rockman Shadow in the final level. Before the stage begins, we get that cutscene where it explains that Rockman Shadow is actually another version of Megaman from the future, similar to Quint, who was one of the enemies we faced in the Megaman Game Boy games, connecting those two games. And also, like Quint, he actually uses a jackhammer as one of his primary weapons. When we get to this point in the level, destroy these guys on the first two screens and you'll be able to still make it over the gap. On the third screen here with these rock firing guys, you'll have to wait for the bottom one to fire out a rock so you can bounce on top of it in order to get above and get to the ladder. Here, take out the giant cog moving back and forth and try to avoid too much damage from the bat. It fires a lot of projectiles. I usually get hit at least twice during that part. On the next screen, you're going to destroy the crab waiting for you, avoiding the cog moving back and forth, and make it to the next ladder, where you pretty much have a similar room to what we just had a few seconds ago. There's also a large chunk of health in the upper left corner, if you do need it at this point. Here we have a couple of the cannonball bats, before making on to the next set of cog enemies with now ladybugs moving back and forth at the top part, instead of the cannonball bats. Here, destroy the butterflies from the far left side, then jump on the platform and it will automatically start moving. Do this in order to, of course, get over the large amount of spikes. Drop down here, do a couple of nicely timed slides in order to make it to the next screen with another one of the cog enemies and another butterfly before we make it to the halfway boss. This guy is a weird skull-like enemy that drops down and fires bones at you. When the 3 bones are destroyed, he'll automatically drop down and fire 3 more bones. So my main strategy for him is using charged up Mega Buster shots and letting one bone just keep flying around the screen. Even if you run into one of the bones, the bone will be destroyed, so I try to jump over it when I can and just avoid it altogether. And you actually want to fire slightly below him, instead of firing really directly at him, as I find a lot of times that the fully charged up shots will just bounce off of him if I fire him directly at him. So I fire just a hair below him, and it seems to hit him every time. These night enemies charge forward, and you can only hit them while they're charging or backing up towards their starting point. There's a few of these throughout the last bit of this level. Here, avoid another one of those giant knights swinging his mace ball over his head, and grab some more health over to the left if you do need it, and then you have a weird enemy, a giant pair of scissors. They just move back and forth in kind of a weird pattern going up and down, left and right. They don't really get in the way, they can cause a little bit of damage, but since you can attack them from usually a pretty good distance, these guys aren't a threat, they're just weird. After you destroy this one here, climb up the ladder and go over to the right. Watch out for the slime on the ceiling. Wait for it to kind of fall down, and then after a few seconds it will disappear. While doing so, also take out the knight enemy down below. If you have gotten hit throughout, you're getting close to the boss, so grab the big chunk of health in the lower left corner. With here, wait for the slime to once again disappear, and then attack the knight just like we did before. If you go too far off screen though, he will respawn, so you have to be careful and keep him on screen. Here, wait for the slime to disappear, then drop down and take out another one of those big mace swinging guys. Here you'll avoid another 2 pairs of slime before actually taking out another mace dude. And once this guy is finally done, it's boss time. We finally get the battle, Rockman Shadow. When the battle actually first begins, he'll immediately jump towards you, and then as he lands, he'll slide towards you. He'll keep jumping in a weird kind of jump pattern that allows you a good amount of time to hit him even in the air. He'll either slide quickly if he's a little bit far from you, or he'll end up actually firing a projectile straight out, it seems like, if I'm close to him. I'm not sure if I can really manipulate that or not, but after he gets down about half of his health, he'll then start summoning the giant jackhammer. He'll appear right above you and crash down, and when he does so, it'll cause all these other rocks to start falling down as well. Use the missile ability that we got earlier on in the game to help us out, as you can keep hitting him over and over again, and when he actually gets done with that, he'll then start charging you with his blade. He'll swing at you with the blade, which can be hard enough to dodge as it is, and then projectiles start flying out. During this segment, hold on to your health and just keep firing projectiles at him. With that done, we can sit back and enjoy the ending to Rockman and Forte. So there we have Rockman and Forte, or Megaman and Bass, Challenger from the future for the Bandai Wonderswan. An interesting title, a part of the original Mega Man series, has connections to the other games, has storyline elements, and has stuff that, while being a side game, does have connections to the other games in general. As far as the ending goes, basically Rockman Shadow says that after Quint kind of left, he was pretty much the only robot left, and because of that, kind of filled in with anger and revenge, to the point that he buffed himself up, and then traveled to Mega Man's present time to try to take out Mega Man and everyone involved and all the other robots. I do like the actual ending screen here, as we have a picture with all the original Mega Man characters. It's kind of hard to see because text ends up popping up, but they're all there, including Rockman Shadow, now without the helmet. Also all the animal friends like Rush and Treble and Tango, heck, even Reggae the bird. And after that screen, you can go back to the main menu and start the game all over again. But with that, that's going to wrap up this edition of Play It Through. I'd like to thank you for watching, and of course, I hope you enjoyed.